All right, so everything's changing post World War One in terms of thought, in terms of what we think. But at first, coming out of the World War, the economy is doing pretty well. Even the what's set up in Germany, known as the Weimar Republic, it's doing pretty well. However, there's some issues. It was weak. What do I mean by weak? It was backed by, it wasn't on a solid foundation. Part of the reason why you see that in the second and the third bullet points. And part of the deal is some people say it was a false recovery because Germany and Austria, remember, had to pay $33 billion worth of reparations. Basically, hey, you lost, give us some money. Uh, and they take out loans from the US to pay for those. Okay, so Britain and France are getting money from Germany and Austria, basically US money. And then France and Britain are taking those reparation payments to pay off US loans that they had taken out to try to rebuild Britain and France. Hmm, that's a circle. In other words, if something comes out of it, you're gonna have a problem. And when you start to have overproduction of agriculture in the US, Canada, Argentina, Australia, and just return back to normal production in Europe, supply is really, 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 really high. What does that mean? Prices are going to drop. Rubber is another example. They're taking tons of rubber out of Indonesia and Malaysia, and the supply of that is increasing, so prices are going to drop. So all these export-based economies that have been set up are in trouble. Now, there are a lot of other causes to the Great Depression. Some of the other causes are the fact they're buying stocks on the margin. What that means is they're buying more stocks, and if the stocks go down, you know what the backup is? Stock. So, in other words, if stocks go down, the banks aren't going to get paid back for anything because they had taken stock as the collateral. So, between reparations payments, overproduction of things, you are going to have a fundamental problem. And so, and when demand drops, prices drop, people aren't making money. And by the way, that on the margin, there was that thing I just described earlier. The stock market is going to crash. Businesses could no longer sell their inventories. People aren't making anything anymore. People are losing jobs. There's hurts demand. 45% of banks go out of business. People are losing their lifelong deposits. And because the US was so interconnected with everything, every single industrial country in the world is affected. Really, the only country that is not affected in any realm or in a major way is China, because they weren't as integrated into the world economy. The Germans and the Japanese can't sell their food and fuel. Germany sees unemployment as high as 35%. They see inflation going off the charts in Germany. To the point in Germany, it was the money that they had was literally worth more burning it, because burning it for heat in your house than it was to actually go out and buy something. Nobody has anywhere to export anything to. I mean, the German economy is in trouble. They all had loans from the US. And what do they do to try to combat this? They put more tariffs, in other words, more basically taxes on goods from other countries, and they try to become more self-sufficient. They're not letting other countries send anything in. And the US does this, Brazil does this, basically everywhere does this. And this then arises some new beliefs around how the economy is going to work, because fundamentally, the economy failed. The economy failed here in 1929, and they need to figure out what to do. I mean, women have kept their jobs at first because they are paid between 65 and 75% of what men were. So women were cheaper to keep on during the Depression. But women are forced to stay home in Britain and France. You start to see shanty towns, these kind of just makeshift towns, because people are out of resources. People are out of money. Bread lines are long. Marriages, childbearing goes down. Divorce rates actually go down too, because people can't afford to get divorced because they need two. They're trying to have two people to try to survive. Suicide rates go up. This is not a good time. The wealthy aren't affected as much because they still had money. They still have money. It's going down, but they still have a lot of money. Then a new belief comes in. This is from John Maynard Keynes. What had been in place was, hey, we are going to cut spending. We're going to cut spending. And Keynes says, no, this is not right. You need to get money into the economy, because if money's not in the economy, people aren't spending money. His belief was that those tariffs and cutting spending by governments, that was actually causing it to continue. So when Keynes writes the books, The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, he says the problem was we got supply, but we need to work on the demand side of things. Get people money. So his theories, some of his theories, are put in place by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in the United States, and FDR's goal, it's the New Deal. He'll talk about this way more in a U.S. history class than a world history class, but his thing, we're going to protect banks. We need to provide trust in public institutions again. We're going to build tons of public works projects. We're going to work on taxes more and have more of a redistribution of wealth through the tax system, not a flat tax. And FDR also puts in things like the minimum wage and Social Security. And this is really the first time the U.S. gets involved in protecting the social and economic welfare of people. He's going to give farm subsidies because farmers weren't producing things anymore. So, hey, we need to get the farmers to produce. Now, you can argue, the U.S. is not fully going to get out of the Depression to the end of World War II, and you can argue all you want about how effective were FDR's policies. But one thing that is for sure is that in the U.S. at this time, the U.S. basically had a feeling of something significant needed to change. And let's remember what had happened on the other side of the world. In really all the world, there was a disillusionment with democracy as a whole. And FDR's New Deal and the things that come with it, economically, yeah, you can argue it. But from a perspective of protecting democracy, it did a very good job of that. That's as opposed to what was going on in Russia. Russia was very different. You think Karl Marx, he thought capitalism was on his deathbed, but this dictatorship of the proletariat didn't come easy. Civil war goes on throughout Russia after Lenin had taken power. You had the Red-White Civil War. The Reds were your Soviet side of things. They're the Bolsheviks that are working to basically put communism in place. The Bolsheviks had changed the name of the Communist Party. Many countries are sending forces to Russia to help the whites to try to avoid the Civil War, but the Reds end up winning. So now you have communism fully in play in Russia. Some of the things that are put in place. They start arresting people with secret police. They're going to execute the Tsar and his family in 1918. So that was pre-Civil War. Communist comes in, it's an increase in nationalism. The Bolsheviks take control of the banks, the industries, and other private commercial ventures. Any holdings of the church became property of the Russian government. The holdings of peasants stayed with the peasants, though. So the peasants were pretty happy about this, that they get to keep everything and everything else is going away. They're going to start to seize crops. What you see begin to happen is, actually, they start to cut their production. Uh-oh. So this starts to lead to a problem. That communism, there's no private trade, and the peasants don't have the land anymore. There's no incentive to produce. Lenin sees a problem with this. Industry output is 10% of it was pre-war, and agriculture output is 50% of it was pre-war. So Lenin puts a new idea in place, and that is called the New Economic Plan. And Lenin's New Economic Plan is a compromise between free market and command economy. And here's what I mean by that. Basically, large businesses like large banks, telecommunications, communications, transportation, that's going to be state-run. But if you're under 200,000 employees, you are going to be you can be private ownership. You can be private ownership, and peasants could start to sell what the excess of. So let's realize something here. Yeah, Lenin might have been basically a major believer in Marx, but he has some free market principles because he saw what was going on in Russia and saw that it was failing. And so when he dies in 1924, you're looking at a major what if in history. What if Lenin had stayed alive? And what if the person who he didn't want to take power, that person's going to take power. That person is Joseph Stalin. Stalin is originally from the area of Georgia, part of the Soviet Union. He's an Orthodox, he is a Russian nationalist, and he was an old Bolshevik that continued to argue for a concept called continuous revolution. In other words, he believed in Leninism that you should have the people should rule, but they need a leader. And Stalin should be that leader. Lenin was very afraid of this guy. And he wants our communism to be something on the international stage. And so after Lenin dies in 24, Stalin starts a brutal fight through the Bolshevik Party that had become known as the Communist Party, and he becomes the unchallenged dictator by 1928. He is known as the Man of Steel. And he makes some changes to things. He replaces the new economic plan in 1929 with the 5-year plan. Targets for productivity, especially heavy industry. In other words, we need to catch up with everybody else. We weren't industrialized, and that cost us World War I. We need to do that. We're going to manufacture more steel, more machinery. What you use on a daily basis, forget about it. He puts a government organization of the economy. In other words, it is now centrally planned. You are not looking at free market principles anymore. You're looking at a centrally planned government economy. He declared it successful after 4 years. Granted, nobody had any refrigerators, nobody had any radios, nobody had any cars, but you had tons of steel, you had tons of electricity because Lenin had electrified everything and Stalin only increases that. However, here's a big thing. Everybody has a job. Everybody has food. Now let's think about this. It's 1929. The rest of the world is going through a depression, and Stalin makes sure everybody has those things. And so that's a significant difference. You could almost say Russia is more stable during the Great Depression because everybody has food, everybody has a job, and he also has a new vision of agriculture, the collectivization of agriculture. He took over private farms. It's now collective farms, where every farmer shares in the profits of the excess goods. So no farmers own the land, everybody owns the land. It's a Marx idea, and you're looking at, hey, we're going to share the excess, but everybody owns everything together. Some peasants were really angry, and some are actually going to kill the cattle. The kulaks, who were wealthy farmers in Ukraine, rebel against Stalin's policies, and they get massacred because of it down in Ukraine. And basically, because people are rebelling against Stalin's farmers, and in the end they aren't producing as much, you're going to have millions dying of starvation. You're going to have farmers moving to the cities, and about 3 million peasants are dead. Well, this is a problem for Stalin. Stalin has to make some changes. And what Stalin does is he starts to see some enemies are getting around him and they're starting to grow. And what he does is what's called the Great Purge. Because of that collective nature of agriculture, and in 1934, after the 17th Congress of the 17th meeting of the Communist Party, they saw the disasters, collectivism, and his general ruthlessness. Stalin was using the secret police all over the place. People are doubting Stalin. And Stalin hears that people are going to start to maybe try to overthrow him. And that's a problem. So this Congress of the Victors, that was the Communist Party, had changed to the Congress of the Victims. And Stalin sees this. And he goes crazy. He kills 2/3 of the Central Committee of the Planning Committee of the Communist Party. He takes out 1/4 of the higher-ranking army officials. He's sending people to labor camps in Siberia. He's going to kill about 3 million people through labor camps and what is known as cleansing. He takes out any resemblance of resistance to him in the Communist Party. And he is the unopposed communist leader of the Soviet Union at this point. What you should know, responses to the Industrial Revolution. How does the U.S. Respond to the Great Depression? What happens in the Soviet Union after Stalin takes over from Lenin? Think about some of the basics of like the new economic plans, Stalin's plans, especially around agriculture and industry. And think of how cause and effect of the Great Depression.